This week marks 100 years since the end of one of the most famous court cases in American history. In July 1925, the small town of Dayton, Tennessee, hosted a trial on human evolution, the interpretation of the book of Genesis, and broader sentiments about Christianity in what is known as the Scopes trial. A substitute science teacher was found guilty of violating Tennessee's ban on teaching evolution in schools. His $100 fine was later overturned. The Scopes trial often is portrayed as science against religion, but is that entirely accurate? Earlier, I talked to Father John Conley, chair of Philosophy and Theology at Loyola University, Maryland. I started by asking him why this case was so important in 1920s U.S. education.
It was extremely important because in many science classes, there was a growing emphasis on Darwin's theory of evolution. And many people believed Darwin's theory of evolution conflicted with the biblical account of creation we find in the Bible, especially the opening chapters of Genesis.
And what was reaction from Catholics during and after the trial?
The reaction from Catholics was very mixed because I think here's part of the problem. Tennessee was an overwhelmingly Protestant state. At that time, Protestantism was very split between a liberal wing that accepted historical criticism of the Bible, a more liberal interpretation, and then a wing, they called themselves fundamentalists because there was a famous pamphlet they released in Los Angeles saying these are the fundamentals of Christian belief. And one of them was a belief in the literal meaning of the book of Genesis. Now, I think part of the problem was Martin Luther and other reformers insisted there was one meaning to the Bible, that was the literal meaning, whereas the Catholic and Orthodox churches and earlier Jewish rabbis had said the Bible itself and all of the texts have multiple levels of meaning. There's the allegorical, there's the spiritual, there's the moral. So yes, there is a literal meaning, but that's not the only meaning. And that's why I think while many Catholics objected to the theory of evolution, at least in Darwin's version, the reaction was not as strong as it was in those who were starting to call themselves Protestant fundamentalists.
And how does this trial remain relevant today, 100 years later, especially for Catholics?
Well, I think it remains relevant in a number of ways. First of all, especially in the United States, you don't find much of this in Western Europe, there are millions of Americans, overwhelmingly Protestant, who want to not ban the teaching of evolution, but have an alternative to evolution in the public schools, in the science classroom. And the courts so far have said no to that is an establishment of religion, even though these supporters will claim it's not a theological theory. So that controversy remains there. But there's another controversy we're not dealing with too well. On the 100th anniversary, the textbook that was used by John Scopes, a textbook by a man named Hunter. It was called A Civic Biology. This was a textbook in social Darwinism because you had a number of thinkers who said evolution's just not a biological fact that we're descended from other species, but as a matter of fact, we should be taking measures to make sure those people who are less evolved within the human species are prevented from procreation. The 1920s was the golden age of these forced sterilization laws that were found constitutional by the Supreme Court in 1926. And thousands of people were sterilized against their will because they were disabled, they were prisoners, sometimes simply because they were on welfare and considered burdens to the state. And there was a real racism there.
That is so disturbing. Father John Conley, Chair of Philosophy and Theology at Loyola University, Maryland, thank you for your time and expertise.
Okay, thank you.